This property reverts to blood family now. Pack your bags and get out. Raymond's voice boomed through my living room, echoing off the walls like a thunderclap. I stood frozen in the doorway, still dressed in the black funeral dress I'd worn to my husband's service just yesterday. My heart pounded as I watched in stunned silence, my eyes following Raymond's sons, Gerald and Timothy, as they carried out my grandmother's antique chair, the one Marcus, my late husband, loved to sit in while reading his evening newspaper. A faint smile always on his face. The chair creaked under their careless grip, a sound that felt like a betrayal of the life we'd built together. "You have no right to be here," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos unfolding before me. My hands clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms. Raymond turned to face me, his weathered face twisted with a smug satisfaction that made my stomach churn. "No, girl, you've got it wrong. This is family property. Always has been, always will be. Marcus is gone now, and you're not blood. Simple as that. I am Ashley Coleman, 37 years old, a nurse who's worked hard for everything I have. Until yesterday, I thought I understood my place in this world. For 8 years, I was married to Marcus Coleman, a gentle, kind-hearted veterinarian from Richmond, Virginia. Together, we built what I believed was a beautiful life in the Victorian house his grandfather had left him, a home filled with love, laughter, and countless memories. But as I watched Raymond's sons haul my belongings toward the front door, tossing my life into cardboard boxes like it was nothing, I realized how naive I'd been about his family's true feelings toward me. The morning after laying my husband to rest, I returned from my sister's house to find the locks changed and the Coleman men treating my home like their personal storage unit. Raymond stood in the center of it all, orchestrating the removal of my life as if I were nothing more than a temporary tenant whose lease had expired. "Marcus wouldn't want this," I whispered, my hands trembling as I watched them stack our wedding photos carelessly on the porch, the frames clinking together in a way that felt like a desecration of our love. Raymond snapped back, his voice sharp and cold. "Marcus is dead, Ashley. He was too soft-hearted when it came to you. We warned him from the start. You were only after the family money. But he wouldn't listen. Well, that charade is over now." His words hit me like physical blows, each one landing harder than the last. 8 years of family dinners where I was tolerated but never welcomed. 8 years of conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room, leaving me standing awkwardly on the outside. 8 years of being treated like an intruder at my own husband's family gatherings. I endured it all because Marcus asked me to, because he believed his family would eventually come around, that their hearts would soften. But they never did. Gerald appeared beside his father, breathing heavily from moving furniture, sweat beading on his forehead. "Most of her stuff is out, Dad. What about the kitchen things?" he asked, as if I weren't standing right there. "Take what's valuable, leave the rest," Raymond replied without even glancing at me, his tone dismissive. "She can have until sunset to collect whatever junk we don't want." As I stood there, watching them dismantle my life piece by piece, something cold and resolute settled in my chest. They had underestimated me completely, just as they always had. But what they didn't know, what they could never have suspected, was that Marcus had never underestimated them. He'd seen their true colors long before I did, and he'd been preparing for this moment. My relationship with the Coleman family had been strained from the very beginning, like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. When Marcus first brought me home to meet his parents 8 years ago, the reception was arctic, their smiles as cold as a winter wind. I was a nurse from a middle-class family, someone who'd worked her way through nursing school, scraping by on scholarships and late-night shifts. To Raymond and his wife, Patricia, I was clearly beneath their veterinarian son, who came from 3 generations of property owners, a lineage they wore like a badge of honor. "She's very practical," Patricia had said that first evening, her tone dripping with condescension, as if practicality were a disease. I was helping clear the dinner dishes, trying to be polite, while Marcus spoke with his father about expanding the veterinary practice. "I suppose that's important in your line of work," she added, her eyes narrowing as she watched me stack plates. The subtle digs continued through our courtship and into our marriage, sharp little barbs that pierced my confidence. They never missed an opportunity to mention the daughters of their friends, girls who'd gone to private colleges, who came from established families, who fit their narrow definition of worth. When Marcus and I announced our engagement, Raymond's first question wasn't about our happiness or our plans for the future. Instead, he sat me down for what he called a pre-wedding discussion. "You understand, Ashley, that family property has been passed down through generations," he said, his voice heavy with implication. "The house, the land, the practice, these things stay within the bloodline. Marcus is young and romantic, but business is business." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair beside me, his jaw tight. "Dad, we don't need to discuss this now," he said, his voice firm but strained. "Actually, we do," Raymond pressed on, undeterred. "Ashley seems like a sensible girl. I'm sure she understands the importance of preserving family legacy." I nodded politely, swallowing the anger rising in my throat, not wanting to cause trouble for Marcus. But inside, I was seething. The way Raymond spoke about me, as if I were a gold digger plotting to steal their precious legacy, made my stomach turn. What they didn't realize was that I had never wanted their money or their property. I fell in love with Marcus because of his kindness, his dedication to healing animals, and the gentle spirit that lit up every room he entered. Marcus saw how his family treated me, and it weighed heavily on his heart. He noticed the way conversations became stilted when I joined them, how holiday invitations came with subtle suggestions that I might prefer to work a shift at the hospital instead. He watched his mother rearrange seating at family dinners, ensuring I was always placed at the far end of the table, as far from the real family as possible. Most importantly, he heard the comments they made when they thought he wasn't listening. "Son, you could do so much better," Patricia said one Sunday afternoon while I was in the kitchen, washing dishes after a tense family meal. Her voice carried through the thin walls, each word cutting deeper than the last. "That girl is nice enough, I suppose, but she's not our kind of people." Marcus defended me that day, his voice firm and unwavering. "Mother, Ashley is exactly my kind of people. She's caring, hardworking, and she makes me happy. That should be enough. Happiness is wonderful, dear, but compatibility matters, too," Patricia replied, her tone patronizing. "Think about your children, your future. Don't you want someone who can truly be part of this family?" The conversation ended there, but the damage was done. Marcus came into the kitchen afterward and wrapped his arms around me, apologizing for his mother's words. I could see something shift in his eyes that day, a new understanding of just how unwelcome I would always be in his family circle. The moment that changed everything happened 3 months before Marcus died, at his cousin's wedding. It was another Coleman family gathering where I played my usual role as the polite outsider, smiling through the discomfort. During the reception, I excused myself to use the restroom and returned to find the family huddled in a corner, deep in conversation about estate planning. When Marcus goes, the property comes back to the family, right? Timothy asked his father, his voice low but clear. "I mean, she's not actually entitled to anything long-term, is she?" "Don't be ridiculous," Raymond replied, his tone dismissive. "Wives get temporary rights, but family property always returns to blood. It's been that way for generations. Ashley will get whatever Marcus leaves her in personal effects, but the house, the land, the practice, that all comes back where it belongs." Gerald nodded approvingly. "Good. I was worried we might have legal complications with her involved." Patricia added, her voice dripping with venom, "The only complication is getting her to leave peacefully when the time comes. You know how these types can be when money is involved." Marcus' cousin Walter chimed in, his tone casual but cruel. "Maybe she'll remarry quickly and move on. Problem solved." The casual way they discussed my future widowhood, as if Marcus' death was an inevitability they were already planning around, made my blood run cold. But what shocked me most was their absolute certainty that I had no legitimate claim to the life Marcus and I had built together. I slipped back into the bathroom, my hands shaking, and stayed there until I could compose myself. When I returned to the reception, Marcus was chatting with his elderly uncle about new surgical techniques for treating injured wildlife. His face lit up with the passion that defined him. Uncle Harold was just telling me about the eagle they brought in last week, he said, pulling me into the conversation with a warm smile. Ashley, you remember that case where the patient came in with similar wing damage? As we discussed the intricate details of wildlife rehabilitation, I realized how deeply Marcus' family misunderstood him. They saw only the successful veterinarian, the heir to their precious family property. They missed the man who stayed up all night nursing injured animals, who donated his services to the local wildlife rescue, who chose love over their narrow definition of status. That night, as we drove home through the quiet Virginia countryside, I made a decision that would prove crucial in the months to come. Marcus, I said carefully, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was about to reveal, I overheard your family talking about estate plans tonight. He glanced at me, his expression immediately growing serious. What did they say? They seem very confident about what happens to our property if something happens to you, I replied, my heart racing. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road. Then he reached over and took my hand, his grip warm and reassuring. Ashley, I need to tell you something. I've been putting off some important legal matters, but I think it's time we had a serious conversation about our future. That conversation revealed a side of Marcus I hadn't fully understood. As we sat in our cozy kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared countless late-night talks over coffee, he poured himself a glass of wine and took a deep breath. I've known for years how my family feels about you, he began, his voice heavy with sadness. I kept hoping they'd change, that they'd see what I see in you, a compassionate, brilliant woman who makes every day better. But after tonight, I realized they never will. Marcus, you don't have to, I started, but he interrupted gently, his eyes soft but resolute. Yes, I do, Ashley. My family has been planning for your departure since the day we got married. They've convinced themselves you're temporary, that you'll somehow disappear when it's convenient for them. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the garden we'd planted together, the roses we'd nurtured side by side. They're operating under some archaic notion that family property automatically reverts to blood relatives when I die. They have no idea how inheritance law actually works, and they've never bothered to ask about my will. My heart began to race. You have a will? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned back to me, and I saw something new in his eyes, a steely determination that reminded me he was, after all, a Coleman. I've had a will since the week after we got married, he said. But 3 months ago, after that conversation with my cousin about his upcoming wedding, I decided it wasn't comprehensive enough. He walked to his study and returned with a folder thick with legal documents, the weight of them heavy in his hands. I've been working with Charles Peton, the estate attorney downtown. You remember him? He handled the Johnsons' divorce last year. I nodded, recalling the prominent lawyer who'd helped our neighbors through a complicated property dispute. Charles helped me understand something important, Marcus continued. My family's assumptions about inheritance aren't just wrong, they're legally meaningless. When we got married, I immediately changed all property deeds to joint ownership with right of survivorship. That means everything, the house, the land, the practice, automatically becomes yours if I die first. The weight of Marcus' words settled over me like a protective shield. But Marcus, your family doesn't know this, I said, my mind reeling. They have no idea. He opened the folder and spread several documents across our kitchen table, their crisp edges catching the soft light. That's not all, he said, handing me a letter written in his careful handwriting. As I read it, tears filled my eyes, blurring the words on the page. To my family, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to protect Ashley from your cruelty. For 8 years, I have watched you treat my wife as an outsider, someone unworthy of basic respect, let alone love. You have made it clear that you consider her temporary, a problem to be solved rather than a family member to be cherished. The letter continued for 2 full pages, detailing specific instances of their behavior, the cold silences, the backhanded compliments, their casual discussions of my future as if I were a tenant to be evicted. Marcus had been paying attention to everything, cataloging every slight with the precision of a man who knew his time was limited. I had Charles witness and notarize everything, Marcus explained, his voice steady. I also had him create backup copies to be held at his office. If anything happens to me, he has instructions to contact you immediately. I looked up from the letter, overwhelmed by the thoroughness of his planning. Marcus, this is incredible. But why didn't you tell me sooner? His expression grew sad, his eyes softening. Because I hoped I'd never need to use it. I kept thinking maybe I could bring them around, make them see how wrong they've been. But after listening to them plan your departure like you're some kind of squatter, I realized they'll never change. He reached across the table and took my hands, his touch grounding me. Now we continue living our lives, loving each other, and building our future together. But if something happens to me, you'll be protected. They won't be able to intimidate you or steal what we've built. 6 weeks later, our world shattered. Marcus was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, a cruel twist of fate that came after what he thought was just persistent indigestion from too many late-night emergency calls at the clinic. By the time we caught it, the disease had already spread through his abdomen, a silent invader that had taken root without warning. How long? I asked Dr. Williams, my voice barely a whisper, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. 6 months, maybe 8 if we're aggressive with treatment, she replied gently, her eyes full of sympathy. I'm sorry, Ashley. I wish I had better news. Marcus took the news with his characteristic calm, immediately shifting into planning mode, as if he could organize his way through the unthinkable. That evening, as we sat in our living room processing the devastating diagnosis, he called Charles Peton. Charles, it's Marcus Coleman. We need to expedite those estate documents we discussed. Yes, it's urgent. Over the next 2 weeks, while Marcus began chemotherapy, we spent our evenings updating and finalizing his will. Charles came to our house 3 times, bringing additional paperwork and ensuring every detail was properly documented. During his final visit, he made one more suggestion. Marcus, given what you've told me about your family's behavior, I recommend including a no-contest clause. If anyone challenges this will, they forfeit any potential inheritance entirely. Do it, Marcus replied without hesitation, his voice firm despite the fatigue etched into his face. I want Ashley protected from any legal harassment after I'm gone. As Marcus' condition deteriorated, his family's behavior became even more telling. They visited frequently, but their conversations focused almost entirely on business matters, future plans for the property, the veterinary practice, the family legacy. I noticed them taking inventory of valuable items, discussing which furniture was original Coleman pieces, and making bold assumptions about what would happen after Marcus died. Ashley, dear, Patricia said one afternoon while Marcus was napping, her voice dripping with false concern. Have you given any thought to where you'll live afterward? I stared at her, incredulous. This is my home, Patricia. I plan to stay here. She exchanged a knowing look with Raymond. Well, of course, temporarily, she said, her smile tight. But long-term, you'll want to find something more suitable for a single woman. Raymond added, his tone patronizing, this house is really too large for one person. Plus, the upkeep is expensive. Family property requires family resources to maintain properly. I bit my tongue, remembering Marcus' words about not revealing our legal preparations. But their presumption was infuriating. They were already mentally redistributing our life together, treating me like a temporary caretaker whose services would soon be obsolete. The worst conversation happened 2 days before Marcus died. Gerald and Timothy came to visit, ostensibly to see their brother, but I overheard them in the hallway, their voices low and conspiratorial. Dad wants to start moving some of the valuable pieces out before the funeral, Gerald whispered. He's worried Ashley might try to claim them. Smart thinking, Timothy replied. We should probably change the locks, too, just to avoid any complications. What about the veterinary practice? Do we need to notify his patients about the transition? Gerald's voice was smug. Dad's already contacted that new vet in Henrico. Dr. Peterson is interested in taking over the client list. I stood frozen outside Marcus' room, listening to them plan the dismantling of our life, while my husband lay dying just feet away. Their words were a stark reminder of why Marcus had taken such drastic steps to protect me. That night, I told him what I'd overheard. He was weak from the pain medication, his voice barely audible, but his eyes flashed with anger. "They're already dividing up our life?" he asked, disbelief mingling with sorrow. "I'm afraid so," I replied, my heart breaking for him. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, then looked at me with a determination that belied his frail condition. "Ashley, promise me something. When they come, and they will come, don't let them intimidate you. You have every legal right to everything we've built together. Charles has all the documents, and he knows exactly what to do." "I promise," I whispered, holding his hand tightly, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine. "And don't feel guilty about fighting them," he added. "They've made their choice about how to treat you. Now they'll live with the consequences." Marcus died on a Tuesday morning in October, surrounded by the golden light filtering through our bedroom windows, the same windows we'd spent countless mornings gazing out of together. I held his hand as he took his final breath, whispering how much I loved him and how grateful I was for the life we'd shared. The funeral was held 2 days later at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, where we'd been married 8 years earlier. The Coleman family took over the arrangements, pushing me aside as they planned what they deemed appropriate for their son. I let them handle the details, knowing their presumptions would soon catch up with them. "Ashley, dear, you'll sit in the second row," Patricia informed me the morning of the service, her tone final. "Family sits in the front row." I nodded quietly, choosing not to point out that I was his wife, his closest family. Their behavior was only providing more evidence of their complete disregard for my place in Marcus' life. After the funeral, Raymond pulled me aside at the cemetery, his voice low and authoritative. "We'll give you a few days to grieve, Ashley, but then we need to discuss practical matters. The house will need to be cleaned out, and we'll need time to prepare it for Gerald's family." "Gerald's family?" I asked, stunned by his audacity. "He's been wanting to move back to Richmond," Raymond explained matter-of-factly, as if it were already decided. "The house is perfect for them, and it keeps the property in the family where it belongs." I stared at him, my grief momentarily eclipsed by anger. "Raymond, that house is my home." His expression hardened. "Was your home," he corrected. "You were Marcus' wife, and we're grateful for the care you gave him. But now it's time for family property to return to family." "I am family," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Raymond's eyes narrowed. "You're not blood, Ashley. There's a difference." That night, I stayed at my sister Janet's house in Glen Allen, needing space to process my grief away from the Coleman family's suffocating expectations. Janet, who had never liked Marcus' family, was furious when I told her about their plans. "They can't just kick you out of your own house," she exclaimed, her voice rising with indignation. "You were married to Marcus for 8 years. "They seem very confident about their legal position," I replied calmly, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Well, they're wrong," Janet said, her hands on her hips. "You need to call a lawyer immediately." I looked at her, my heart heavy but resolute. "Actually, Janet, Marcus already took care of that." The next morning, I drove back to Richmond, planning to spend the day at the house, gathering my thoughts and beginning to sort through Marcus' belongings. But as I turned onto our street, I saw Raymond's truck parked in our driveway alongside Gerald's van. I sat in my car for a moment, watching through the front windows as figures moved around inside my home, their silhouettes betraying their urgency. They weren't waiting for permission or discussion. They were simply taking what they believed was rightfully theirs. I pulled out my phone and dialed Charles Peton's office. "Charles, it's Ashley Coleman. They're at the house now, moving things out." His voice was calm but firm. "Are you there?" "I'm sitting in my car outside," I replied. "They don't know I'm here yet." "Perfect. Don't go inside alone," Charles instructed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes with copies of all the documents. Do you remember what Marcus told you to do?" I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Let them dig their hole deeper," I said, recalling Marcus' exact words. "Exactly," Charles replied. "The more presumptuous they are, the clearer it becomes that Marcus was right to protect you legally." As I waited for Charles to arrive, I watched Raymond direct his sons like a general overseeing a battlefield. They were loading my grandmother's rocking chair into Gerald's van, the chair I'd inherited from my mother's side of the family, a piece of my own history they had no right to touch. That's when I knew the time for politeness was over. I got out of my car and walked toward the house, my steps steady and purposeful. I stood in the doorway of my own home, watching Raymond orchestrate the removal of my life with military precision. Gerald was wrapping my grandmother's china in newspaper, handling it with the carelessness of someone who saw it as mere collateral. Timothy was loading Marcus' favorite reading chair onto their truck, the one where he'd spent countless evenings lost in his books. "You're back sooner than expected," Raymond said when he noticed me, not even having the grace to look embarrassed about being caught looting my house. "We thought you might want to stay away for a few more days while we handle the transition." "The transition?" I asked quietly, my voice laced with disbelief. "Getting the house ready for Gerald's family," he replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Don't worry, we'll pack your personal items separately. You can pick them up once you've found somewhere else to live." I watched him for a moment, marveling at his absolute certainty. "Raymond, I need to tell you something important," I said, my voice calm but firm. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "What's that, dear?" Before I could answer, Charles Peton's silver BMW pulled into the driveway. Raymond's face went pale as he recognized the prominent estate attorney stepping out of the car, a briefcase full of legal documents in hand. "Mr. Coleman," Charles called out as he approached the front door, his voice professional but commanding. "I'm Charles Peton, Marcus' attorney. I believe we need to have a conversation." "I don't understand," Raymond stammered, his confidence crumbling. "What's this about?" Charles looked around at the furniture being loaded into trucks, then back at Raymond with a calm that belied the gravity of the moment. "It's about the fact that you're currently removing property that belongs to Ashley Coleman, and you need to stop immediately." Gerald dropped the box he was carrying, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the room. "What are you talking about?" "This is family property," he protested. Charles opened his briefcase, his movements deliberate. "Legally speaking, everything you've touched today belongs to Ashley. Marcus left a comprehensive will, and I have the documentation right here." Timothy stopped loading the truck, his face a mask of disbelief. "A will?" "But family property always," Charles interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Family property follows legal ownership, not assumptions, and Marcus made his wishes very clear." Charles spread the legal documents across our kitchen table while the Coleman men gathered around, their confident expressions rapidly changing to confusion and then anger. "This will, dated 6 months ago and properly witnessed, leaves everything to Ashley Coleman," Charles explained methodically. "The house, the veterinary practice, all bank accounts, investments, and personal property. Everything." Raymond's face turned red, his voice rising. "That's impossible. Family property has been passed down for generations. You can't just give it away to outsiders." Charles remained unfazed. "Mr. Coleman, your son owned this property outright. He could leave it to whomever he chose, and he chose his wife." Patricia, who had arrived during the confrontation, protested shrilly. "But she's not blood family." Charles pulled out another document, his expression unwavering. "Actually, under Virginia law, spouses have automatic inheritance rights that supersede any family traditions. But more importantly, Marcus changed all property deeds to joint ownership with right of survivorship. Even without the will, everything would have gone to Ashley automatically." Gerald looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You mean we have no claim to any of this?" "None whatsoever," Charles replied. "In fact, by removing property without permission, you're technically committing theft." The room fell silent except for the sound of Patricia's sharp breathing. Raymond slumped into a chair, the weight of his miscalculation finally hitting him. "There's more," Charles continued, pulling out Marcus' letter. Marcus also left detailed instructions about why he made these decisions. He began reading aloud, his voice clear and steady. "To my family, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to protect Ashley from your cruelty. For 8 years, I have watched you treat my wife as an outsider." As Charles read Marcus' words, documenting years of subtle and not-so-subtle mistreatment, the Coleman family's faces grew ashen. Marcus had been paying attention to everything, every slight, every dismissive comment, every assumption that I was temporary. Furthermore, Charles continued, Marcus included a no-contest clause. Any attempt to challenge this will result in the forfeiture of any potential inheritance. Within hours of Charles's revelation, the Coleman family faced the complete collapse of their assumptions. Raymond was forced to return every item they had removed, including my grandmother's chair, which had somehow ended up in Gerald's van. The locks they had changed were replaced at their expense, and they were banned from entering the property without my explicit permission. The veterinary practice, which Raymond had already promised to Dr. Peterson, remained mine to operate or sell as I chose. The family land they had considered their birthright was now permanently outside their control. Their casual planning sessions about my departure became evidence of their complete misunderstanding of both legal reality and Marcus' true feelings about them. Patricia's hopes of maintaining her social standing were shattered when word spread through their social circle about how they had tried to steal from their deceased son's widow. Gerald's plans to move his family into our house evaporated, leaving him to explain to his wife and children why their promised new home was no longer available. Timothy's assumptions about inheriting part of the veterinary practice cost him the job he thought was guaranteed. Most devastatingly for Raymond, the respect he had commanded as the Coleman family patriarch disappeared overnight. The man who had spent decades lecturing others about family loyalty discovered that his son's final act was one of complete rejection of everything he represented. The community that had once admired him now whispered about his cruelty, their judgment a heavy weight he could not escape. As I stood in my kitchen that evening, holding Marcus' letter and surrounded by the belongings his family had tried to steal, I realized that my husband's greatest gift wasn't the house or the money. It was the validation that our love had been real, that I had been worthy of his protection, and that sometimes the quietest people fight the hardest battles for those they love. The revenge was complete, not because I had planned it, but because Marcus had seen his family's true nature years before I did and had quietly, methodically built walls around our love that they could never breach. Please feel free to comment below if you liked this. Remember to like and subscribers for more.